Thor Ragnarok is often characterized by its comedy.
Oh, that's a crown. I thought it was a big eyebrow.
It's a crown.
Jokes and physical gags fling about non-stop throughout the film, but beyond just having a chaotic sense of humor, it is unique in how it uses humor and whimsy not just for slapstick entertainment, but also as a device to further enforce its deeper themes. Underneath all the whimsy is a scathing criticism of monarchy and imperialism, with a narrative that revolves around ruthless tyrants and how they utilize that whimsy to uplift themselves into reverence and worship from the very people they claim dominion over. My name is Stevie Matt, and today we'll be discussing Thor Ragnarok and the use of humor as a thematic device. Welcome to It's Not That Deep. At the beginning of the story, Thor arrives back at Asgard to find his brother, Loki, masquerading as their father Odin and hosting The Tragedy of Loki of Asgard, a play that reenacts Loki's death in Thor: Dark World, with little embellishments and dialogue that reframe Loki's role in the events. It's a silly, lighthearted way to start the story, but it's more than just a playful gag. In the play, Loki asks Thor to build a statue in his own honor, and we can see that the statue itself has actually been built in Asgard. It's entertainment for both Asgardians and for us, the viewers, but it's also functioning as propaganda to elevate Loki as a hero rather than a duplicitous trickster who has locked the real Odin away on Earth and taken his place. Thor dissolves the ruse easily enough, but this sequence signals what will come later with Hela and the Grand Master. Art does not exist in a vacuum. It is driven by the politics and ideologies of those who create it, and it can be used for more than just escapism and entertainment. We see this within the MCU itself, which has had a strong relationship with the US Department of Defense, who exchanges actual military equipment for authority over how the military itself is portrayed in the movies. Many of the characters are employed by the US military, and Captain Marvel in particular was paired with a real-world recruitment campaign, with US military imagery and themes littered throughout the film, from plot points right down to costumes. And the campaign itself used language common in superhero media and exploited the optics of representation to portray military service itself as heroic and admirable as a way of attracting new recruits. This relationship to the military is not exclusive to the MCU by any means, but Marvel movies are the current pinnacle of cinematic entertainment, and much like Loki's play, these movies can and have been used as direct propaganda. And this is a rather prominent motif all throughout Thor Ragnarok. A grand ceiling mural in the throne room telling through illustration a history of Asgard brings to mind the Sistine Chapel, situated inside the Vatican, where the Catholic Church has exercised and asserted global power throughout history. Much like the Vatican is the center of the Catholic Church's power, the throne room is the center of Asgardian power, which reaches across the 9 realms. One of the core scenes in the movie involves Hela revealing to Scourge the truth behind the Empire's rise to power, centered around the ceiling art in the throne room.
Look at these lies. Goblets and garden parties? Peace treaties? Odin. Proud to have it. Shamed of how he got it.
The mural is composed of soft, pastel colors that reflect the peaceful imagery it's portraying, and when she tears it down, the real mural hidden underneath is dominated by harsh reds and blacks and strong, harsh lines to reflect its story of violence and bloodshed. At some point in their conquests, her ambition exceeded Odin's own, and he chose to banish her and erase her from history. But in doing so, rather than reckoning with the death and destruction he'd wrought across the realms in the construction of his empire, he chose instead to rebrand himself as a peaceful and wise leader, which allows him to continue enjoying the fruits of their efforts.
It seems our father's solution to every problem was to cover it up.
Or to cast it out.
And the mural that Hela destroys is an extension of that revision through the use of art and symbolism. And there is a small but important scene near the end when Thor finally makes his way back to Asgard and enters the throne room. He comes upon the shattered pieces of the mural, and he stops on the piece illustrating him at his father's side. Visually, this scene is challenging him to confront the violence of an empire that he not only inherited, but also actively participated in. But before that, he must find his way back home while marooned on a remote planet ruled by a total screwball simply called the Grand Master. Much like Odin, who positions himself as the All-Father of the 9 realms, caring and wise, the Grand Master presents himself similarly as the playful and endearing leader of a loving community of outcasts and exiles. On his way to meet the Grandmaster, Thor is taken through a psychedelic tunnel where an automatic recording welcomes him to Sakaar, which it describes as a place for those who are lost and unloved. With the melody of Pure Imagination playing on top of the recording, it's a very explicit reference to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, likening the character we're about to meet to Willy Wonka, a colorful and kooky character with very dark, maybe even sinister undertones. And when we meet the Grandmaster, we discover that he is in fact a slaver who buys captives and forces them to participate in gladiator-style battles to the death for entertainment, while the world remains impoverished and littered with trash, and thus more prone to capturing people and selling them to him for coin, creating a self-sustaining slave market. Still, he never breaks his playful and endearing facade. He cracks jokes and laughs heartily even as he's executing people in the most brutal ways possible. There is a small but pivotal scene where he recoils at Topaz's use of the word slaves. As vicious as he is also very conscious of optics and pushes for softer phrasing.
Sorry, the prisoners with jobs have armed themselves.
Okay, that's better, that's better.
This kind of euphemistic language is often referred to as doublespeak, a concept derived from the famed George Orwell novel 1984, an illustration of totalitarian governments in which the official language, newspeak, is specifically designed to restrict free thought by simplifying language. Doublespeak is defined by Oxford Dictionary as deliberately euphemistic, ambiguous, or obscure language. Its wiki article expands on this by noting that it is primarily meant to make the truth sound more palatable. It may also refer to intentional ambiguity in language or to actual inversions of meanings. In such cases, doublespeak disguises the nature of the truth. Examples from the book include a government agency called the Ministry of Peace, which handles military and war, and the Ministry of Truth, which handles the manipulation of historical record to present a version of events that are approved by the governing body. So when Topaz uses slave and the Grandmaster has her adjusted to prisoners with jobs, it's more than just a silly word gag, but a satirical nod to decades of political analysis and criticism. And within the plot itself, this is of course strategic on his part. The Grandmaster taps into this false sense of community that he's developed to turn the common folk, who he calls his loyal Sakaarians, against Thor and Hulk after they arm the prisoners with jobs and seek to escape the planet. Humor is a key part of the Grandmaster's political strategy and the tyrants he represents. He's kooky, eccentric, and whimsical to mask his brutality and endear himself to the people of Sakaar and keep them placated as he continues to rule them with an iron fist. So when he's on screen, jokes are flying at near breakneck speeds.
Because I've been a big part of it. Can't have a revolution without somebody to overthrow. So, you're welcome.
Korg, on the other hand, is soft-spoken and easygoing. He's a warm and light-hearted source of much of the movie's comedy, but he's not to be taken lightly. The reason he's even in the prison is because of a failed attempt at organizing a revolt. His characterization subverts the typical portrayal of a revolutionary, weary and battle-hardened, and presents instead a soft and lovable and endearing source of kindness. And when his time comes, he proves no less useful on the battlefield. Just as the Grandmaster employs humor to mask sinister intentions, the humor around Korg's character makes him, and the revolutionary spirit he represents, approachable and charming and who the audience should be drawn to.
Piss off, Ghost!
And this is opposed to Hela, the movie's main antagonist. Hela is less a character than she is an idea, a personification of the evils of imperialist conquest, so her characterization is far less human or relatable. It's instead rooted in camp. Now, camp is a concept deliberately hard to capture in a single, simple definition, but for brevity's sake, it is often characterized by a sense of theatricality and extravagance, and this is captured in Hela's entire presentation, from the way she walks to the affect in her voice when she speaks.
Good soldiers dying for nothing. All because they couldn't see the future. Sad.
She is cartoonishly evil because the concept she personifies, the endless conquest of empire, is itself pure evil, not meant to be relatable or empathized with. She and it must simply be stopped. And if Hela derives her power from Asgard, then Asgard itself, a place built from conquest and massacre anyway, must also be destroyed. So Ragnarok, the prophesied end of Asgard, turns out not to be the conflict of the story, but its resolution. The film's signature humor finds its way even into this scene because the destruction of the physical place is the first step to rectifying the Empire's sins and starting fresh. So while the surviving Asgardians are given a few moments to take in the sight of their home planet exploding, this moment is still played for laughs.
Those foundations are gone, sorry.
The physical place is not meant to be mourned, but to be bid good riddance, to clear the way for a brighter, less bloodier future. Humor is also employed masterfully in how the movie characterizes its protagonists. Thor, Loki, Valkyrie, and Bruce are all emotionally guarded people, so rather than discuss their feelings openly in dramatic monologues, their inner conflicts are explored and processed visually. Thor tries to talk to Hulk about losing his father and his hammer, but where we really see those feelings explored is through Loki and Korg articulating his feelings for him. Loki tries to talk to him in the prison as he reckons with the same betrayal by Odin that Loki experienced in Thor, but he shuts him out. And their relationship is fraught, as it's been since his first movie, but with Thor so greatly humbled now, subtle facial expressions reveal Loki's regret at Thor clearly giving up on their relationship just when they finally share a common ground that they hadn't before. And then Korg articulates Thor's feelings about losing Mjolnir so plainly that it highlights how silly it is that he's invested so much emotionally into a hammer. The loss of Mjolnir is a pivotal part of his internal struggle through the film, as it causes him to lose connection to his greater powers, but it's also foolishly narrow-sighted because his powers do not derive from his hammer, and Odin calls this out directly later during their short reunion.
Are you Thor, the god of hammers?
That reunion, in contrast, is not played for laughs because unlike the hammer thing, Thor's struggle to step out of his father's shadow is a serious barrier to his growth and a pivotal aspect of his greater character arc. And similar respect is shown to Valkyrie, who spends the entire film skirting around Thor's attempts to recruit her back to Asgard into the fight against Hela, and aggressively pushing back against any attempts to get close to her. She finally has her genuinely tragic backstory revealed in what is probably the most beautiful sequence of the film. Since we get there through Loki's mind-reading powers and are therefore in a sort of mindscape, the flashback is presented as a series of slightly mobile illustrations that are highly stylized and use extremely wide shots, dramatic lighting, and depth of field to convey the grand, nearly biblical scope of the battle. There is no great battle sequence with flashy fight choreography and banter and the natural peaks and valleys of triumphs and defeat, because this is in the mind of a woman who has spent the countless centuries since trying to forget all of this and move on. A standard battle scene would cheapen the emotional impact of this reveal. Instead, it highlights a handful of moments in the battle that illustrate the greater emotional impact that the battle had on her. The Valkyries descend from the heavens like warrior angels to confront Hela, the ferocious devil awaiting below. They are quickly cut down as Hela unleashes her horrifying power. The Asgardian warriors are slain en masse. Val reaches out as the last of her comrades die in front of her. She falls back, and a match cut to her in present time crashing to the floor of the room where her and Loki were fighting marks her visually as a warrior fallen from grace. Nowhere in that sequence is her trauma played for laughs, and as someone who fiercely guards her emotions, her deep internal conflict is instead presented merely through visuals, but with all of its complexities intact. The sole survivor of Hela's massacre of the Valkyries, she's fled the kingdom to the opposite side of the universe, where she captures slaves for the Grand Master in return for coin to afford a drinking habit as she battles survivor's guilt, rage, and grief.
To get back there, I need your help.
Finished.
Bye.
And though each of them now have a very complicated relationship to the throne, they unify through a shared love of their home, and that complicated relationship allows them to do what needs to be done in order to right those wrongs. Thor Ragnarok is full of thrills, jokes, and special effects, a movie unashamed to be as colorful and playful as the comic books it's based on. But it's more than just an empty roller coaster ride. Embedded within all the whimsy is an attack on colonialism, aimed with precision and executed with clarity. But that doesn't mean we can't laugh our way to revolution, nor does the humor inherently detract from or minimize the severity of the situation. In fact, understanding how it can be employed in the service of empire is crucial for fully understanding the dynamics at play, and for Asgard to start anew, walking away from the throne, as the heir is allowed to do in Thor, is simply not enough to cleanse it of its crimes. It must be completely abolished.